Patreon supporters received early access to the video you're about to watch. To find out more about how to become a Patreon supporter, go to patreon.com/TJRTheOriginal or follow the link under Show More and at the end of this video. I want to thank my Patreon supporters who are helping to make videos like this possible. Remasters, reissues, remixes. Some of them are just so welcome. Some of them we didn't realize we needed or wanted them until they arrive. And some of them are just overblown cash grabs. Today I want to talk about 3 artists whose catalogs I feel not only need a reissuing, but in some cases need a remastering as well. In the case of each artist, I will discuss why I feel a reissuing and/or remastering is necessary, and how I think that catalog reissue should be handled. I am sure that there are probably a number of artists whose catalogs you feel very strongly deserve or are in need of this kind of treatment as well. So if I don't talk about your favorites, please leave a comment and let us all know your picks. At this point, I want to remind you that if you'd like to see more videos like this, please remember to click like, click subscribe, and smash that notifications bell so you can know when I release new videos. So before we get started here, I know that there are 2 artists on this list that I feel very confident in saying you're very much aware of them. But I'm going to start with the one that I suspect a number of you might not be familiar with. And as it turns out, her catalog is probably the most complicated one for me to talk about. I'm talking about Rickie Lee Jones, sometimes referred to as the Duchess of Cool, who, by the way, has a connection with one of the artists that I will also be discussing in this video. Now, in case you're not familiar, Rickie Lee Jones is an American singer-songwriter whose music combines elements of pop, jazz, soul, blues, and R&B. In 1979, she made a big splash when her self-titled debut album made the Billboard Top 10. This album featured the jazz-infused hit single Chucky's in Love. The follow-up album, Pirates, made the Billboard Top 10 without the benefit of a hit single, no small feat, and both remain as 2 of my favorite albums of all time. While none of her follow-up albums have achieved the level of mainstream commercial success of her first 2 albums, she continues to record and perform for a very loyal and passionate fan base. So why am I including this catalog? Well, first of all, her debut album did get a remastering on both CD and vinyl, but her follow-up album, Pirates, to the best of my knowledge, has only been remastered for vinyl. This was followed by an EP entitled Girl at Her Volcano, which has never been released on CD and only released on vinyl, and in fact the only way you can get it is to get a used copy. The 3 follow-up albums, The Magazine, Flying Cowboys, and Traffic from Paradise, have never been remastered since their first release either. Oh, and by the way, Flying Cowboys was produced by Walter Becker of Steely Dan, and there's the connection I was talking about. While Rickie Lee Jones has continued to record albums to this day, I am cutting off the reissue portion of the catalog with 1993's Traffic from Paradise, because I don't think her later catalog is old enough to really warrant a remastering. I don't think fans have anything to gain by having one. I'm also not going to be including any of her covers or live albums like Pop Pop and Naked Songs. This particular reissue request just centers on the studio albums only. As stated earlier, Rickie Lee Jones's debut album was already remastered for CD and vinyl during this century. And since it was her commercially most successful album, I feel that what is called for is a double disc release that could include demos and alternate takes, provided of course there are enough tracks available in the vault and nobody burned them away. 3 music videos were made to tie in with this first album, so including these along with some early live performances would be an alternate way to do a double disc set. Including her Saturday Night Live performances from the same time period would also be a great idea, provided there are no rights entanglements. Once again, this debut album does not need to be remastered, but I am definitely in favor of an expanded release reissuing. Now, her second album, Pirates, was remastered for vinyl only, so a CD remaster is definitely needed. And since this album did break the Billboard Top 10, a double disc edition is definitely called for. But for the remaining titles that I have mentioned, just giving us a new, properly done remaster with some bonus tracks on a single disc would be most welcome and probably what is most commercially viable. And once again, the EP Girl at Her Volcano definitely needs to be included since it's only ever been released on vinyl, and I think it was released on cassette tape back in the day. The reason why I'm not bringing up vinyl for this catalog is that a lot of this catalog that I've already talked about has already been remastered in recent years for vinyl. But the few that haven't been will certainly be welcome. Oh, and one other thing about Miss Jones's catalog. As you know, I am very much an advocate against the loudness wars and the overcompression of music. But in the case of Pirates by Rickie Lee Jones, this is one of the few times where I feel like a little bit of compression might be a good thing. This album has so much dynamic range. There are moments where it's just so incredibly quiet and you're turning up the volume just to hear it, and then suddenly it goes boom, and it just explodes with volume, and you're just like, oh. Now maybe that was the desired effect, but too often I have found this to be more annoying than enjoyable. So this is one of the few cases where I would actually say a little bit of compression on a remastering might be a good idea. Just don't overdo it. Artist number 2 is Steely Dan. Now, why? Well, the entire Steely Dan catalog, from Can't Buy a Thrill to Gaucho, was remastered back in the early 90s with the release of the box set Citizen Steely Dan. To the best of my knowledge, the late 90s reissues of those same individual albums used the exact same remaster. As far as I can tell, there has been no remastering here in the United States since then. So I really think that it's been long enough and that the technology has improved enough that a remaster of this entire part of the catalog is definitely needed and would be appreciated. Also, while the late 90s reissues included some new liner notes on the insert, there were absolutely no bonus tracks. I think the entire classic era catalog could warrant an entire repackaging that could include bonus tracks of alternate takes, also early work in progress demos, and any B-sides and or singles that were never issued on any of the albums. Period live tracks would also be great if there aren't enough demos or alternate takes available. These could be in double or single disc releases, but definitely the band's first album, Can't Buy a Thrill, and Asia deserve the double disc treatment, if nothing else. And while I'm talking about those two albums, I think that both of them were commercially successful enough to warrant the deluxe box set treatment, and along with additional bonus tracks and perhaps a book, could also feature a Blu-ray/DVD with a 5.1 mix and or high-res stereo, Dolby Atmos, etc. Now, as for the later albums, Two Against Nature and Everything Must Go, well, they were released and they were mastered during this century. So the only reason to go back to the studio and remaster them would be if these albums were victims of the loudness wars, which personally, I suspect that they were. And in this case, what you would do is you would just basically back off the compression so that the dynamic range of the performance could be felt and heard. I also personally feel that in addition to a separate single album reissue, that a career-spanning box set could also be commercially viable and very much welcomed by fans. Now, with all this said, I do have to address the elephant in the room, and that's the Universal Music Group fire, which I have talked about on this channel. If reports are true, all the master tapes for Steely Dan's entire catalog went up in flames in that fire. Universal Music says we have nothing to worry about, that they have everything backed up. And I hope that's true. But apparently, hundreds upon hundreds of alternate takes and demos by hundreds of artists were lost in that fire. The question remains, what exactly did Universal back up prior to the fire? And is it more than just a second-generation safety master? Artist number 3 is Van Halen. Van Halen. The mighty Van Halen. Why? The original David Lee Roth era of Van Halen's catalog already got a remastering as late as 2015. So in my opinion, a remastering is not necessary. But all of those re-releases included very little in the way of anything extra. Here are the reissues of Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, and all they featured was a 4-page insert that reproduced the original album art, and that's it. No bonus tracks, no historical essays, no new photos, nada. So here is what I think should be done. Since the first 6 albums don't need a remastering, do what Black Sabbath did with their recent original lineup reissues. Release them in expanded digipack packaging, include new photos, pictures of memorabilia, and new liner notes with historical essays. Scour the vaults for early demos, alternate versions, alternate mixes, etc. Historical live tracks work too. If an album has a wealth of good material from the vault, give it the 2-disc treatment. If a specific album comes up short, fine. Release only a handful of bonus tracks and make it a single CD release, but include the expanded packaging. And if there aren't enough releasable demos or alternate takes available, then the other way to go would be to go the route of the 2010 Jimi Hendrix releases, which included expanded packaging and a bonus DVD featuring a short documentary chronicling the making of the album. Now, from the Roth era, I really do feel that Van Halen 1 and 1984 were commercially successful enough to warrant not only a 2-disc edition, but I feel that both of these albums could warrant individual super deluxe box set editions as well. But definitely, those 2 albums deserve a 2-disc set. As for the Sammy Hagar era, I definitely think you can give the Hagar era albums the same treatment. Only these you can remaster, since to the best of my knowledge, this part of the catalog has never received a remastering. Correct me if I'm wrong on that though. And at the very least, the earlier albums in the Hagar era definitely need a remastering. Now this leaves us with the very infamous Van Halen 3 from 1998, which is widely disliked by and large by most of the fan base. Well, this album needs to be included for the completist, certainly. But also from what I've read, there is apparently a decent handful of unreleased material that was being put together for what would have been the follow-up to Van Halen 3. This was, of course, before Van Halen and Gary Cherone parted ways. Now, I realize that interest in this material is probably very limited, but I think it would be interesting to hear it nonetheless. So if you were to re-release Van Halen 3, I think including that material would end up definitely selling you some copies. Oh, and those reunion tracks for the Best of Volume 1 and the Best of Both Worlds compilation albums, well, they need to be included in all of this also. And as for the Roth reunion album, A Different Kind of Truth, well, I feel pretty strongly that this album was also a victim of the Loudness Wars. So use the opportunity to back off the compression like they did with Robert Plant's re-release of Mighty Rearranger. When they did this for Mighty Rearranger, it made a world of difference, and I think the same could be done with A Different Kind of Truth. Oh, and in addition to reissuing the original albums in expanded form, I think that offering a career-spanning box set is not out of the question for this band's catalog. Now, you may have noticed I haven't mentioned vinyl for either Steely Dan or for Van Halen, and the reason is that some of their classic catalog has already been remastered for vinyl, but that which hasn't, definitely bring it on. So those are the 3 artist catalogs that I feel need some kind of a reissuing. And yes, some of this is based on my own personal subjective opinion and my own personal wish to see it happen. But in this video, I've also tried to give sound commercial reasons why this should be done as well. Let me know what you think of my picks, and please share your picks in the comments. Everybody, this is TJR. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. As always, if you like what I do and want to help me make more videos, please consider becoming a patron supporter. Pledging as little as just the cost of a cup of coffee every month could make a world of good if enough of you do it. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.